Welcome back to the Junkie Sports Podcast. Today we're going to play a little game called Panic or Persist. So in this game, we basically are going to go through all the teams that have been eliminated so far in the NBA playoffs, and we're kind of just going to say, do we think that team should panic and freak out and blow up their roster, make some big moves in the offseason, or should they persist? Should they just continue along the path they're on, hope their players develop, and come back ready next season to compete for that championship? So today's going to be part one of this series, and so we're going to cover all teams in the first round that have been eliminated so far. So those teams are going to be the Orlando Magic, the Portland Trailblazers, the Brooklyn Nets, the Dallas Mavericks, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Utah Jazz. Let's start with the 8 seed that got eliminated by the Milwaukee Bucks. So we're going to start with the Orlando Magic. So Davis, why don't you go ahead and kick us off? Panic or persist?
Well, obviously the Magic are in a little bit of some type of eternal purgatory where it seems like, these last couple of seasons, they're always kind of just fighting for the last spot in the playoffs and haven't really been able to make that next big leap. So it kind of depends how they want to go about the future. But, I mean, obviously they have a lot of solid young pieces that they can continue developing. With like Markelle Fultz, Mo Bamba, and some of those types of guys. But with the Jonathan Isaac injury and him being out next season, I don't know. That kind of puts a big question mark in the air for me for how they should kind of go about dealing with this upcoming offseason. Because, I mean, this is obviously not the first time that he's had injury problems. So I don't know if he's a guy that they can just kind of rely on in their back pocket to eventually come back and be a meaningful player for like the cornerstone of their franchise. So for me, I think trying to find a way to get Vucevic into a trade package and maximize the value by bundling Aaron Gordon with that trade, I think is probably the most logical move for them at this point. But I definitely want to hear what you guys think on it.
Cole, go ahead.
I'm not entirely knowledgeable on all the guys that are going to be open for free agency this summer. But in the case of, this fall now, but in the case of the Magic, I honestly think they should just stay put, stay persistent. I mean, they got a couple of young pieces. Aaron Gordon is 25 and Markelle Fultz is 22. They did kind of stick themselves here with Vucevic, as he is under contract until 2022-23 season, and he is going to be paid over $20 million every single year. I wouldn't necessarily trade him this offseason. I don't know that anyone's really worth it at this point, especially given the fact that they are not going to compete for the next few years. I would say just stay put, try to continue to get Fultz and Evan Fournier and Aaron Gordon bigger roles as they continue and keep on moving forward. I know Jonathan Isaac being out really, really hurts because he was blossoming into a fantastic defensive player, but as it is, things like that do happen. So I would just say stay put. Keep continuing with the core you got now. The season may not be fantastic next year or the year after that, but I do think they are at least going in the right direction. I think right now for a team like them, patience is the right move.
Yeah, so if I was the Orlando Magic, I'm slamming the panic button right now. I mean, your best up and coming player, Jonathan Isaac's injured after just coming off another knee injury. If I'm the team, I'm very scared. I mean, that's 2 consecutive knee injuries in the same year. That's really, really frightening to me. And so if I were them, I'm going to kind of follow what you said, Davis. I'm going to look to try and trade Vucevic because this free agency class is very, very limited. There's not a lot of good players in this free agency class. And so I think we're going to see a lot of movement in the trade market this offseason with teams that are on that cusp of challenging for an NBA championship. They're going to want to come out, make some big trades in the offseason, and we're going to talk about some of those potential moves that might be happening as we continue to other teams. But if I were them, I'd look to trade Vucevic, also trade Fournier. I think he's someone that could go really well in the market right now. Both those 2 players could fit really well in a championship team. And so those are the 2 pieces I'd look to trade the most. I'd probably hold on to Aaron Gordon for a little bit because although his growth has kind of been limited over the past couple of years, he hasn't really been expanding his game. He's still really young. I think he can grow into a better player. So I'd personally try and hold on to him. But if I were them, I'd be freaking out because right now they're in that weird situation of they've got some really good players on the team, but they're also trying to develop their younger talent. They're not really in a position to compete anywhere near for a championship. And so if I were them, I'd kind of hit that reset button, go back to draft mode, get some more young players, and try and hopefully develop some nice young talent alongside Jonathan Isaac once he becomes healthy. So, so we have 2 panics and 1 persist there for the Magic. So let's go hop over into the Western Conference with the AC. They got knocked out in the first round, and the Portland Trailblazers. So Davis, panic or persist?
This one's also pretty challenging, especially because with the injuries and before the Carmelo Anthony signing, they were looking pretty rocky during the regular season, but then they kind of went on a tear towards the end, and obviously in the bubble had a pretty historic and unprecedented run to kind of make that final push and get the 8 seed. However, with Hassan Whiteside's $27 million contract, and he's going into free agency this offseason, so they don't have to deal with that. They have more cap space to be able to make one of the bigger splashes in the free agency market this offseason. To me, the question comes down to, is it time to break up the Damian Lillard and CJ core? I mean, obviously, they haven't really been able to, make that deep run into the playoffs like we know that they can have at their ceiling. But at the same time, I don't know if just with the core of those 2 guys, if they'll ever really make that next big leap. And that's been something that's been talked about in previous off seasons after playoff exits as well. But I mean, at some point, it seems like they need to get the value out of those guys before they start on a downward trajectory quickly. And, obviously you can never predict injuries and that type of stuff, but I don't know if they'll be able to entice Carmelo Anthony back to be able to keep him around their team, because I think Carmelo proved that he's obviously worth more than $2 million that he was getting paid from them. And so I don't know if they're going to be valuing trying to keep him around. I mean, obviously it was nice seeing how he kind of was able to provide them with an extra scoring threat whenever CJ or Dame were having off nights or with different lineups and matchups and that type of thing. But for me, I'm personally in the belief that just with the clearing of the Whiteside contract from their payroll from this year, and now that they have Nurkic back, they can get him healthy. And obviously the blossoming of Gary Trent over these last couple games and whatnot, I think that they should honestly just stay course and try to find one of the free agents in this offseason to try to kind of rebuild around. And obviously they need more defense in their lineup. And so I think they need to be going after some of the more enticing defensive players in this free agency class.
So from what I've seen, I don't know. I don't really see a ton of pieces that would really help them really make a massive jump by any means. I know I've heard Terrence Ross from the Magic, ironically, swimming around there in a couple of rumors that they would package with Trevor Reeves or someone else to try to get him. That would work as a small forward with some length, a pretty good defensive presence, a consistent scorer. He would be a decent replacement, Carmelo Anthony, because I like Davis said, I think he's on the button with this one. He's not going to come back, especially with that $2 million contract, and they're not going to, pay him properly. I think if I could think of anyone, I do believe from the center position, Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka are both free agents coming out of Toronto, and I think those 2 are going to be hot items on the market. I would say that for Portland to replace Hassan, I would really go for Serge. I think Serge has had a big reawakening. He's always been good, relatively underrated. But I think, as you've seen with his shot blocking still there, his shooting has been fantastic. I think he would pair really, really well aside next to Dame and CJ, especially in that center position and working off of Nurkic. I think that would add excellent depth, and that might even give him even more sides that he could work with, because Hassan Whiteside, of course, very good rebounder, but outside of that, he was struggling to play the game of basketball recently.
Yeah, if I'm the Trailblazers, I'm persisting. I think they can make small certain moves around their roster, but I think the biggest issue they had is just the fact that they played so horrifically throughout the regular season that in the first round they went up against the best team in the Western Conference. And so I just think that's kind of bad luck for them. They were playing good basketball at the time, but I don't know what sort of moves they can do that are just going to dramatically push them over the edge. I mean, at the end of the day, and I know this might be a bit of a hot take, but I don't think you can win an NBA championship if Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum are your two stars of your team. I just don't think that's going to cut it. I mean, they're to me they're a downgraded version of Steph and Clay, and Steph and Clay still had a lot of good pieces that fit around them, and I just don't think that team is going to ever be able to compete for a championship the way they're currently constructed. And I just don't think they're going to be. I don't think they can make those moves. They're going to have to do like drastic changes to their team. And so if I were them, I'd kind of just persist and sort of hope that they can kind of just do what they did a couple years ago, make the Western Conference Finals with some nice matchups in the first and second round, and then maybe getting hot at the right time. I think that's kind of the only way they maybe get to the finals or something. But, I mean, the West is going to be loaded next year. We have teams emerging, teams coming back healthy in the Warriors. So I just don't think there's anything that Portland's going to be able to do except just continuing on their trend right now, hoping all their players stay healthy and that they don't get an 8 seed next year and hopefully place a little bit higher in the West. So if I'm the Trailblazers, I'm just going to continue persisting. But let's go ahead and hop back into the East. So let's go with the 7th seed that got knocked out in the first round to the Raptors, the Brooklyn Nets. So Davis started off. Are you going to be panicking or persisting?
Yeah, they have one of the more unique positions in the NBA right now, obviously with KD and Kyrie being able to come back at full strength, hopefully next season. And so, I mean, obviously, even though they were the 7th seed this year, they have so many good young pieces, and Spencer Dinwiddie, and even like guys like Karis LeVert, Jared Allen. There's no reason that they need to be panicking right now. They knew going into this season that 2021 was kind of the year that they were looking, and so they overachieved still in this season. And so I think there's obviously no need for them to panic. I think they'll be in great shape to be contending for the 1 seed out east next season, just if they keep the exact same lineup. So I'm absolutely not panicking on the Nets.
Yeah, I'd say I believe they have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, DeAndre Jordan, and Karis LeVert all signed through 21-22. So they're in great shape. I think they're one of the few teams that really doesn't have to panic. And if anything, if they made no moves, they could still look very eagerly into the next year in terms of going to that Eastern Conference Finals and then hopefully moving into the finals. The only question I would say is try to maintain your roster the best they can. So Joe Harris, I know he'll be out after this year. I would try to sign him back. I don't really know how much he would go for in the market, but I mean, just a shooter like him, he's an absolute player, and he's really, really dynamic, and he performed about as well as he could in the playoffs. So, I mean, honestly, maintain the roster where they are now. Again, just try to keep it together as much as they can, because I think they got 2 stars in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. They have a budding star in Karis LeVert, and they just got depth on depth. So if anyone's most prepared for next year, it's the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, I agree. It's completely agree with you guys. It's an easy persist. They don't even know what sort of team they have yet. They gotta kind of have to play that out. So just because with all their players injured into these playoffs. So yeah, completely agree. Easy persist for me as well. Let's go ahead and hop over into the Western Conference. We're going to do the 7th seed there as well. So the Dallas Mavericks. They had a pretty enjoyable series against the Clippers, but let's kick it off for us, Davis. Do you panic or persist?
No, I mean, you can't panic if you're the Dallas Mavericks. They have one of the brightest futures for the next 4 or 5 years, looking down the line. And so, I mean, you got to just continue letting Luka try to understand more and more, get him more experience with, different packages and whatnot that are in the NBA. And I mean, obviously his growth has been able to jump tremendously each of the seasons that he's played. And so you got to just stay course. I mean, they have one of the brighter futures in all of the NBA. And so there's no need to panic. One of the things that I think that they need to be looking towards is Tim Hardaway Jr. will be a restricted free agent in the 2021 offseason. And so if they can try to sign him to an extension before that, I think that would be one of my top priorities for them. I think he's a really nice piece to kind of help Luka and Kristaps kind of build around. Obviously, they have Seth Curry under contract for the next 4 years as well. Guys like Jalen Brunson, are also, or Dorian Finney-Smith are also, good role players that they have under contract as well. And so there's no real need for them to panic. And especially with Dwight Powell coming back from his ACL injury, he's a good impact player that they were definitely missing when it came time to the playoffs. But I mean, they gave the Clippers a good scare without a full lineup, whether it was Kristaps getting ejected or his injury later in the series and stuff like that. And so, yeah, there's definitely no need for them to panic at all.
Yeah, they're sitting pretty. They're doing fine. I know Trey Burke is a free agent after this year. I would look to see what you can get for him. He really performed very well in the bubble. The only thing I would say is looking for more defense. I know their offense was excellent, but their defense was their biggest struggle. And I think that they'll be an interesting and entertaining team, but if they don't fix this defense to some degree, they are just going to be kind of an outside team, especially when the Warriors come back next year. So I would say this is kind of a weird one, but someone who I think would actually be quite an interesting fit due to the fact that he's not a very good offensive player at all, but defensively as a guard, he's fantastic, is Frank Ntilikina. I know he comes from the New York Knicks, and they are going to be dishing out a couple of players that they had faith in for the future, and obviously he hasn't really worked out for them. They could dish out maybe even just like a second-round pick, or maybe even like Justin Jackson or someone to go out and get him. And having him side by side to Luka would take so many defensive pressures off of him, and I think he would really boost their defense as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is just as easy as the Brooklyn Nets one. It's an easy persist. It's a growing team. They just need to continue to grow and develop. They need to get Dwight Powell back healthy from his Achilles injury. I kind of agree. There are a couple things that they could do either by a trade or free agency, pick up a few more defensive assignments. I think finding some sort of defensive-minded guard to kind of play alongside Luka, like you said, Cole. I think that'd be a really good fit on that roster, so that way Luka can do what he does best and focus on that offensive side of the ball. So I do think there are a few things they can kind of do in this offseason, but I mean, again, there shouldn't be any drastic changes made. They just need to continue to develop Luka and Kristaps into potentially one of the best duos in the NBA down the line. So let's go ahead and hop back over to the East. We're going to go ahead and do the 6th seed. This should be an interesting conversation, but we have the Philadelphia 76ers. So, Davis, are you going to panic or persist?
Unlike Joel Embiid, I do not trust the process. So at this point, that's just kind of a joke because the process is more so geared towards, building through the draft and some of those types of things. But, I mean, they're in quite a predicament. Obviously, we didn't get to see Ben Simmons playing in these playoffs, and so that kind of, in the minds of the ownership and management in Philadelphia right now, they might not, be 100% sold on trying to panic. But if I'm them, oh my gosh, how do you get rid of Al Horford's contract? How do you get more value out of Tobias Harris? They're paying him so much, and I do think they have enough young pieces and guys like Al Horford or Tobias or Josh Richardson that they can kind of bundle in to try to make a bigger splash in different trade packages to try to make the cap space work and all that type of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. For me, there's no future in which Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid can work on the court together. And I know this is something that has been said multiple years in the past, but we still just haven't been able to see it. And so I don't know. If I'm them, I'm probably looking to move on from Ben Simmons over Joel Embiid. Although there's more injury concerns with Joel Embiid as the big guy and whatnot, and his previous injury struggles and question marks with that, I still think he's the more dominant player that can help take over games when it matters most. And so for me, I'm trying to see what you can get out of Ben Simmons. Maybe, throw in Al Horford and Matisse Thybulle, maybe Furkan Korkmaz or Shake Melton or one of those two players, and see if they can get one of the bigger trades in this offseason and get it done. I think they will be looking to definitely make that big change. They haven't shied away from trying to make it work in the past, whether it's getting Jimmy Butler in there, and they've tried a lot. They really have. I'll give them that, but what they have currently just isn't working, and I don't think it's ever going to be enough to get them over the next threshold. And granted, I know that Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons are still both young players that they have under contract together through 2023, but at the same time, there's definitely limitations in what Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid can do together on the court, and so I don't think those are going to be going away anytime soon, especially since Ben Simmons has still not been able to figure out his shot. And so, yeah, I definitely have been full on panic mode for the 76ers for the last couple of years, and that's not changing because of a first-round exit this year.
They are about as buried payroll-wise as you could find for a team in the league. I mean, you're paying Tobias Harris so much money up until 2023-24. Al Horford, I imagine they're going to be shopping him around. Honestly, I think it's a situation where they are panicking because you're choosing either Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid. I don't think they're going to perform well enough together to get you a championship. If I had to choose who, I guess I would go with Ben Simmons, but honestly, I don't feel great about either of them. I know Ben Simmons is under contract for a long, long time, but my main concern with Joel Embiid is you're 26 and you're a 7-foot center who has had multiple injuries. And typically history shows if you're a 7-foot center, your prime doesn't typically last well over 30. And he's getting there much faster than we realize. So if you were able to shop him around and hopefully get him for a fantastic deal, maybe a lot of youth, a lot of shooters, doesn't really matter. Just honestly, anything at this point. I would trust a little bit more in Ben Simmons. I don't know if he'll ever become a great shooter, but he is still so versatile that I think you can run a lot around him. So in my case, panic. Joel Embiid, try to shop him around. You can find something for him. I mean, he is too valuable to just get nothing. And then Al Horford as well. I don't think you'll be able to shop them both together, of course. That would just be too expensive. But, yeah, they should be panicking. Start trying to unload some of these contracts because they are looking really bad now.
Yeah, I completely agree with you guys. This is a very large smack on the panic button for me. I think the process has definitely not worked. They need to get rid of Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid. I think Joel Embiid's the better player, but I think Ben Simmons is a player that you could better construct a championship team around. I mean, a step aside from Nikola Jokic, I don't know if there's another center in this league that could be your best player and you could win a championship with the way the three-point ball has been kind of introduced in today's game. And so I don't think Joel Embiid can be the best player on a championship team. And so I personally would probably try and stick with Ben Simmons, try and get a lot back for Joel Embiid, get a lot of shooters. Also, I mean, Al Horford has been absolutely horrendous on his contract. However, I do think if they get rid of Joel Embiid, I think Al Horford might go back to some sort of the play that he had when he was in Boston, where he was a solid center. I think playing alongside Joel Embiid really limited his ability to play successfully. And so I think Joel Embiid's your first priority off the books. And then I'd also look – I think you need to try and get Al Horford or Tobias Harris off contracts as well. I think you got to try and find value for them somewhere because I think they've both shown that they kind of haven't really shown up to the money that you're paying them. So, yeah, this is a very big panic, especially after they fired Brett Brown already. If I'm the 76ers, I'm very nervous right now, that's for sure. But go ahead.
I stumbled onto a three-team trade on the internet that I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on because I thought it was it's a big trade potential, but I mean obviously the likelihood is pretty unlikely. But I still thought it was interesting enough that I wanted to bring up here on the podcast. So the trade involves the Houston Rockets, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the Oklahoma City Thunder. So in this potential trade, the Rockets would get Josh Richardson, Ben Simmons, and 2 second-round picks. The 76ers end up with James Harden and Chris Paul, and the Thunder end up with Al Horford, Matisse Thybulle, and a first-round pick from the 76ers. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. The only team that I think would be a little bit skeptical of it would be the Rockets, because how do you kind of make Ben Simmons and Russell Westbrook work together? But if they're getting a guy like Josh Richardson, um, and some more picks in the future as well, I don't know if necessarily it's a horrible trade for them, because they have Harden and Westbrook under contract for so long. And at this point, Harden is definitely going to have more trade value for a team that's trying to win a championship now. And, maybe Russ and Ben Simmons would work if you just surround them by an abundance of shooters. And, those two would be incredible in the full court transition offense. But, those half court sets would be pretty rough in my opinion. But the 76ers ending up with James Harden, Chris Paul, and they'd still have Joel Embiid, I think that immediately puts them in championship contention right away. And then the Thunder, obviously, if they end up with Horford, Thibault, and another first-round pick, they're willing. They're probably one of the teams that's willing to take on an Al Horford bad contract, as long as they're getting young assets, because they're, as we've talked about in the past, they're kind of in reset mode for the future after overachieving this year. And so I don't know. I just thought it was a very interesting 3-team trade, and I kind of wanted to get you guys' thoughts on that.
So I'm trying to remember all the pieces here. So who went to who would be going to the Rockets?
The Rockets would be getting Josh Richardson, Ben Simmons, and 2 second-round picks.
Well, 2 second-round picks. Yeah, I don't know about Ben Simmons and Westbrook. I know you threw that out there, and I don't really know how you'd work on that, especially with D'Antoni gone. I guess they are going to be not abandoning, but they're going to be leaving some of the major reliance on three-point shooting. But that would leave a lot of exciting playmakers, a lot of extraordinary athleticism. I don't really know if you could honestly look at the Rockets fan base and look at that move and say, yeah, that looks like that's going to work for a handful of years. As for the Sixers, though, yeah, that looks fantastic for the Sixers. I mean, if you got Harden and Chris Paul together, not to mention with Joel Embiid, yeah, I think they'd be ready for the championship. So Sixers would come out the major champions on that one.
Yeah, honestly, I think this trade's very, very much hypothetical. I mean, if this trade remotely occurs, I mean, the 76ers just committed highway robbery. I mean, for what they're giving up and getting back, I mean, to me, that's just insane. I don't see Houston or honestly OKC making those trades. I mean, although I see OKC maybe potentially not minding taking on a larger contract like Al Horford. It just personally doesn't make sense to me to give up Chris Paul for a longer contract. Because I think that's a big point with getting rid of Chris Paul, is because his value is high, but also his contract's really high. And all you're getting back is Matisse Thybulle and a first-round pick. I don't know. To me, that's just absolute highway robbery by the 76ers. I mean, I don't know. I just think this trade it doesn't remotely happen. I don't think the Rockets would give up James Harden for Ben Simmons, Josh Richardson, who's been honestly not living up to how he looked in Miami and stuff. And so I don't know. I don't see this ever happening, to be honest with you guys. But let's go ahead and hop back into our little panic and persist. So we just did the 76ers. So yeah. So let's go ahead and hop over in the West, do the 6th seed there of the Utah Jazz. So Davis, panic or persist?
This one's a little odd, because I'm personally under the belief that Rudy Gobert's fit in the modern NBA isn't something that is to be extremely coveted. Yes, he has the the defensive skills to make incredible plays and be up for Defensive Player of the Year each season. And they have Donovan Mitchell, they're not even paying him a whole lot right now. He'll only be getting like $5 million next season. But at the same time, without Gobert's ability to stretch the floor and knock down threes, which is, part of the modern day NBA for centers and what's expected, I'm not in love with this team. And yes, they were ahead 3-1 in the series, and maybe could have made a deeper run if they would have just secured one more game. But, that's not what happened. And you could see that they had to bring Gobert out of the game sometimes because he was just getting abused in different pick and roll or packages and whatnot. And for a guy that is so highly touted on the defensive side, if it comes down to the playoffs and he's not able to, and he's able to get just kind of attacked by other teams like that, I don't know if that's a type of team that you want to continue trying to build around for the future. They don't have a lot of guys under long contracts, so after the 2021 season, in general, if they do stay course, they'll have a lot of wiggle room in their cap space to be able to make some bigger splashes. Obviously, they'll have to pay Donovan Mitchell a huge contract. But outside of that, for me, I'm definitely more on the panic side of things for them.
Yeah, I'd say I would agree some on the panic side here. I wouldn't be freaking out by any means. I wouldn't be pounding on the button like I would the Sixers. But in the case of the Jazz, I think they have a bunch of good guys, but it's one of those teams where they're kind of stuck in proverbial second round purgatory. I know they didn't make it to the second round, but it kind of feels like that's their ceiling right now, because what it feels like is they're adding like Bogdanovich, good guy, great scorer. They added Conley, great veteran, great player, but it's just a bunch of good guys, and it doesn't feel like they're mixing extraordinarily well. I mean, their whole season was just wait until they're all together and they finally got the chemistry. Just keep waiting, and it never really happened. And I'm kind of worried that that's the sort of situation they're in currently. As for what to do about that, that is a great question. I would say the number one thing you do is make sure you sign Mitchell. He is your future if you can. I'm pretty sure he has already gotten into some sort of agreement with them. He really does want to stay in Utah. So if they can do that, that is priority number one. After that, I don't know that Gobert or Conley is going to be a guy on your roster if you want to win a championship. This may sound silly. I know that OKC might be shopping around Chris Paul. I don't know how the money would work, but if they would in some way, shape, or form be interested in Mike Conley, I don't know if that would really work. But if they can get someone like Chris Paul as sort of a leader, he doesn't necessarily have to be one of your big scorers because they already got Bogdanovich and Mitchell, and they can carry an offensive load to an extent. I think they just need a really good veteran, a sort of patrolman, a guy who can watch with the team, who can be a little bit more nitty gritty. Because, and again, on top of that, with Gobert, if you watched that series with the Nuggets, as both teams were getting tired, you could pretty much tell by Game 7 it was Murray and it was Jokic, right? And the thing is that though Murray could go get you buckets, so could Jokic. And on the side of the Jazz, it felt like it was Donovan Mitchell, and that's about it. Because Gobert looked entirely gassed, entirely out of it. Their offense looked extraordinarily one-dimensional. And I think part of that is Gobert. He offers no sort of legitimate, consistent offensive threat down there in the center position. So I would say either one, Conley or Gobert, if you can kind of get them out of there as possible. Try to get a strong veteran presence, because right now I think their problem is, like I've said, they are kind of stuck in this purgatory in the Western Conference where you have a bunch of good guys. That roster looks quite good and very consistent on paper, but they just don't have that yes man, that next guy that can take them over the top. So that'd be my main problem with them.
What do you think about them potentially looking at Gorgon Dragic to sign for a free agent? He's unrestricted and has his bird rights, but I mean, kind of, if they do part ways with Mike Conley, I think Dragic is the kind of guy that they can plug into that system and definitely have a more impactful stint with them and kind of help push them forward. But I don't know. I'm just looking at the free agents, and he seems like one that if I'm the Utah Jazz, I'm trying to go after him pretty hard.
That is a good one. I know he's going to be hot on the market now, obviously, because of what he's been doing with the Heat. He's a tough and scrappy player. I think he can bring a little bit more like a guts element to that team. The only situation with him is I wonder if part of why he's playing so fantastically well is because he's paired into what looks to be like the perfect Heat system for him. There are certain cases where players will play out of their minds in the playoffs, and then they go to a new team the next year, and they're still good, but they don't quite excel to that level because the players around them don't bring out their best traits quite like their previous team did. So I do agree that could work. I would like Dragic much more than I would Conley. But as for that being the thing that takes him over the top, I'm still a little bit questionable about that.
Yeah, so for me, I actually disagree with both of you guys. I think the Jazz should persist. I think that having Bogdanovich out was a really, really big deal for them. I think he can fill that role as that go-to guy along Donovan Mitchell, who has emerged as a star in in that first round of the playoffs. So if I were them, I'm persisting. I think you guys made great points about Rudy Gobert and some of his weaknesses being exploited in the playoffs, but. I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, he is a defensive player of the year. And so if I were them, I'm going to just continue to persist because I think their two main issues were the fact that Bogdanovich was out. And then also, I think, and this is more of an issue with how he played throughout the year, but Mike Conley was atrocious throughout the regular season. And then in the playoffs, he actually started playing like pretty well. So I think next year, if they can have a consistent Mike Conley throughout the regular season, get a better seeding, kind of build that chemistry with Bogdanovich back. I think they're a dangerous team next year. They're very good defensive minded, and I think Donovan Mitchell has shown that he can put his team on his back when they need it. So if I'm them, I'm just persisting.
But do you think if they do persist, do you think their ceiling is a championship type of team? Because for me, yeah, they can kind of be like the next Portland Trailblazers where they're, always making the playoffs. They're, able to, steal a series or two depending on how the matchups work out in any given year, but they're never going to have that championship, like that championship type of run just with their current team composition. So I don't know. Do you think their ceiling's that high, especially out west?
I mean, I don't know if they can compete for a championship like right now, but I think a couple years down the line, because I think Donovan Mitchell can grow into that MVP level caliber player. I mean, if he does what he did in the playoffs consistently in the regular season, I mean, he's up there for MVP talks. And I think they need to make small moves throughout their roster. But I mean, the big point you guys talked about with Rudy Gobert, I don't know, who are you going to get as a center in the league that's going to be able to fix the issues with Rudy Gobert? I mean, I don't think that's an issue with Rudy Gobert specifically. I think that's more of a point about centers in general in the playoffs. And I think it's more on the Utah Jazz to maybe find that guy that's more of a small ball five that can kind of fill in that role late in games when the other team's playing small ball. I know with like the Celtics, for example, they do that a lot. They bring in Grant Williams instead of Daniel Tice a lot when they go small. And I think the Jazz need to more look for that, find that guy instead of completely just getting rid of Rudy Gobert. I mean, I think he does a lot of good things for that team. And so, I mean, I don't know if they can compete for a championship with how loaded the West is, but I don't think there's a move that they can make that's going to put them over that hump. I mean, they'd have to just absolutely decimate their roster. And to me, at that point, I mean, that's not going to help them in the long run. So that's why I think they should just persist and sort of maybe figure out the fine kinks in their roster. But I mean, people forget, a lot of people had them as their dark horse championship team this year because they're such a defensive nose team. I just think things didn't go their way these plays. I mean, they were up 3-1 on a team in the Western Conference Finals right now. So I think they just need to make some small changes to their roster, but nothing crazy. I think they should just continue and persist. So, go ahead.
Just so I get this right, one of your considerations was perhaps like a smaller guy you can plug into that center position to give you more mobility compared to Gobert.
Yeah, especially when the other team goes small. I mean, I think that might help them defensively. Because I mean that's Rudy Gobert's biggest issues at perimeter defense.
Well, I don't think he'd be willing to be off the bench again. But what would you say, like a Montrezl Harrell plugging into that position?
I think that'd be very nice.
That working out pretty well.
Yeah, and that would be a very nice fit. And I think that's the sort of role they need to look for. I think Montrezl Harrell obviously is at that top end for that kind of player, but I think that sort of fit of that small ball five that can go get you buckets, be a hard nosed defender. I mean, another good example might be, and I don't know if they'd get him, but like a PJ Tucker. I think those types of players are someone that would fit really well with them, and help take away from Rudy Gobert's defensive weaknesses out on the perimeter.
But for me, the biggest difference in the whole, I know you're just using it as an example, but like when the Celtics are bringing out Tice or at the end of the game, and plugging in Grant Williams. Tice and Gobert are very, very different players, and especially with Rudy Gobert being like one of the focal points on the Jazz team, especially. He's getting paid the second most on their roster as of now. Like if you're in a position where one of your marquee players for your franchise is a guy that you need to bring out at the end of the games, that's exactly my point. That's why you need to be panicking and try to be moving him, because at the end of the day, the guys that are getting paid the most should be the guys at the end of the game that can help you win the games. And if we're all in agreement that Rudy Gobert is not that guy, then why are they paying him?
I think that's dependent on who you match up with. I mean, if they're playing, I don't know, like the Portland Trailblazers or the Los Angeles Lakers, like these teams with like good, strong, dominant big men, I mean, obviously Rudy Gobert is going to be on the floor. They need him there. And if you have someone, I mean, I'm just going to say this as a hypothetical situation, but let's just say like they had Montrezl Harrell. Let's just hypothetically say like they traded Gobert for Montrezl. I'm just making this up, but I mean, Montrezl is going to get killed in the paint. I mean, Anthony Davis is going to absolutely slaughter him. So would Nurkic. I think Rudy Gobert has value at the end of the game, but I think it also comes down to matchups at the end of the day. I think you have a decent point about how much he's getting paid, but I mean, I think Rudy Gobert is fine defensively, especially at the end of the games. I do think they need to go get that small guy to maybe help out in certain situations, but I mean, at the end of the day, he is a defensive player of the year for a reason. I think he does still have value late in games, and that's why I wouldn't panic, because, I mean, I don't know if you go get a small five that can maybe be a little bit more mobile defensively. I think that's also going to bring about weaknesses, because now you're losing your best shot blocker on your team, and so now defensively at the rim, I think teams are going to be able to get whatever they want. So. I don't know, but I mean, I think time will tell, because it's also going to depend on how that team looks in the next season when they get Bogdanovich back healthy as well. And that wraps up part 1 of the Junkie Sports podcast, Panic and Persist. Come back next week to check us out for part 2.